And good evening and welcome to today's Order Paper Show, where we'll be joining with, I think we've got our first former MP on the show, Ibrahim Omer, and tonight's focus is your bill that has been taken over by Camilla Bellich. And we've also got here Laura, who's joining us all the way from Kira McAnulty's electorate, and we got Eric, who's joining all the way from Dan Badua's electorate. And Ibrahim, are you in Wellington Central or Rongotai? I'm not exactly sure which part of the line you live on.
I run in Wellington Central in 2023. I'm currently in Auckland working for ET Union, but yeah.
Oh, okay. So which electorate in Auckland?
Pardon?
Which electorate in Auckland?
Oh, Mankiki.
Yes, Eric actually stood there against Priyanka in the at the general election.
Right. Cool.
Right, yes. Small world.
Didn't Greg Fleming say he would lie down on a set of railway tracks that now is becoming a fast-track project?
Yeah, something like that. He did say that he would, something like that, yeah.
Yeah. Is that to double-track the Only Hunter branch line?
You can say a lot of things.
Yeah. I mean, I'd just like to know what they're going to be doing on there. They wanted to lay down on railway tracks. I mean, come on. It's like, if you're going to get hit by the train, you're not going to survive it.
Yeah. Okay, so fill me in, guys. What's happening around all the rumor mills swirling about Wellington there, where CUN is going to intervene and call a snap election? It's coming up in staff news. It's coming out in...
I don't know, but if we did have a snap election, we won't actually have any election until the middle of February. Right. Because of the thanks to the recent law change to do with the postal voting, instead of it being a 12-week turnaround period, it's going to be now a 14-week turnaround period.
Oh, I also think that the bar is very high for the central government to intervene. Yeah. But also, I mean, the majority of the councillors said that they want to work together with the mayor. So I don't see any grounds for the central government intervention. As I said, the bar is quite high.
And if it does happen, I do know as a ratepayer, we can challenge it and ask for a judicial review. The council doesn't have to ask for it. The ratepayers can ask for doing it because it's removing democracy. And what happens if a judge says you overstepped the mark?
Yeah. And the election is 1 year away anyway. So.
Exactly. And like, what is it? Basically, if there was one called, we can't do anything till there, whereas we can actually amend a long-term plan.
Yeah.
National wants to fast-track everything, including trying to get in charge of the council.
What happens if they can't service the, what was the thing going on in the newspapers about that insurance thing where if Wellington doesn't qualify, then the whole thing collapses? Or no?
So Wellington City Council has got a insurance coverage problem.
Okay.
And it's to do with the fact that if it went to, so this is what I heard from Councillor Nico Wanera, was that if they were to maximally insured everything, they would be potentially having to fork out at least $1,000 alone on insurance per rates account.
Wow.
At least. So, people sit there and complain. Like, I pay for my commercial car insurance on my van. It's $105 a month, which works out to it's $150 a month, but it works out to be about $1,200 a year. Imagine having to pay that alone for the council's insurance, and that doesn't include your own home insurance.
Wow. So
and that doesn't include the other things on top of it. So that was what they were looking at, was some things were self-insurance. And the quickest way to kickstart the fund was sell the airport shares, but we know that didn't sit there and fly. I do know Nico put an amendment into instead have the dividends put into the investment fund, but that failed.
Wow.
And now they've made the decision not to sell the shares, which means they have to go back and relook at the budgets. It's all sorts of things in there.
So apparently words like shambolic, because areas where pipes with sewage are bursting and all that. So
that's years of long lack of maintenance.
Years of underfunding, underdevelopment.
Yeah. Now, before we kick off, Abraham, please tell me why you put into the biscuit tin was it theft by employer amendment bill?
Thanks for the question, Sam. It's so in New Zealand, basically, if you are an employer, and if an employee steal $1 from you, and straight away they go to prison. I'm talking about $1 single dollar. If it's the other way around, an employer withhold the money that's owed by the employee, and if it's even deliberate, it's not in the Crimes Act. And what they get is basically slap on the wrist, and they get away with it. So when I first came in New Zealand, my first ever job was maybe about a few weeks later. I went all the way down to Wairarapa. Laura, you might be living there if you are from Kieran's Electra.
Yes.
So to work on the farm. Okay.
Yep.
So I have worked for 9 days. And at the end of 9 days, it was a payday. And the contractor called us one by one into his car. And it was my turn. I went to his car. And I'm so excited. The first ever check in New Zealand from the work that I did. I was so excited. Then he told me, you did a shitty job. And you actually going to cost me money. I think you should pay me for transporting you every day to and from Wairarapa. So you have done a bad job. The employer is going to cost me money. You actually, you don't have anything. So
it's not just, sorry, Ibrahim. But I just want to point out, this is not something that's only happened to migrant workers. It's also happened to Kiwi-born workers. I've had that type of messaging as well. It's like, did a shit job in forestry, get out of the car, you're going to walk.
Absolutely. I mean, when I put this bill in, when this bill was pulled out of the biscuit tin, I got a whole lot of emails, messages from all over the country, including all the way from Invercargill. And the Kiwis, like Pakeha, Pacifica, Maori, you name it, and sharing their own experiences. And the young women, young men, it's like it happened to everyone. No one is immune from wage theft. So at the time, newly arrived refugee, I didn't know my rights. Where I came from, you cannot even think about challenging your employer because it's it's a cultural thing. But also there is no rights. There's no unions. There's nothing. You get sacked and you're not gonna get a job again. So it's a taboo thing. So all I could say was I just walked away, really frustrated, angry, but there is nothing I could do. I didn't know that the law could give me a right to actually say to this guy, hey, you're going to pay me. Otherwise, I'm going to go and complain, for example, to the Labor Department or go to the unions. I didn't know all these things. I just walked away. 9 days. I would wake up 4 a.m. He would come and pick me up 5 a.m. We don't get back home until 10 p.m. So that's one thing. And then I became a union organizer. As a union organizer, and a lot of union organizers can attest to this, and we spend half of our time basically chasing out the lost wages for our members. like a lot of these people, it could be like a Pacific. It's mainly happens to low-paid workers because these are the most vulnerable people. Low-paid workers are everywhere. They are in forestry. They are RSA workers. They're cleaners. They're security guards. They're hospitality workers, and I have done all these jobs. I've done farming. I've done cleaning. I've done, once I worked in the hotel for about 2.5 years with no one single holiday. Okay, by the time I had enough and resigned, they just organized a morning tea and a goodbye. So I didn't know that actually I had to cash out, like the annual leave that I accumulated. We're talking about thousands of dollars. And then I started working at Vic Uni, and that's where I met the union guy. That's through a friend. I joined the union. I shared my experience and what happened to me in the hotel, what happened to me with the contractor. And he said, "Oh, they must have paid you really good money from the annual leave." I told him, "Not even a penny." "What do you mean?" He explained to me. This is about 4 or 5 months after I left that job. We called the boss, and he told me, "Oh, we have been looking for you, man. Where are you? We miss you. Bro, you have money to pay me, man." "Yeah, that's why I've been looking for you," which is all bullshit because they have my number. They could have called me. So all these things happen every day. So we got into parliament. I'm in a position of power where I can actually make a difference. What is the first thing that I can do to make a difference in working people's lives? I've got my own experience. I've got people that I work with every day, cleaners, vulnerable people, and they lose. People just chase up their money and they give up.
The power imbalance between.
I don't want to generalize. There are a lot of good employers, responsible, ethical, but there is also a lot of rotten employers that do these things. So that's where it came from. That's what inspired me to come up with this members' bill.
Is it retrospective, the bill, Ibrahim? Is it retrospective? Can you go back years to claim back, or it's just right.
No, it can't be. It can't be retrospective. Unfortunately, it becomes effective from the day that given a royal consent, and from the day that becomes the law. But otherwise, we can't go back. Otherwise, it will create a lot of problems.
Yes. Lots of litigation, I think. Actually,
the first thing I would do was chase away the contractor that robbed me away from my 9 days of hard money. I would go look for him. That would be the first thing I would do if this was retrospective, but unfortunately it's not.
Yeah. Well, this didn't happen now. I had my experience where in 2005, I was the assistant manager of a telemarketing firm, right? With 30 staff, I was managing them. And we were doing very well and getting lots of clients. And suddenly, without even realizing, we came to the office. We were locked out. And the whole company just up and went to Australia. I'm not kidding. And I was like with 30 other staff and workers looking, and what do we do? Oh, we can go to the complaint section, blah, blah, blah. But as you can say, they will go through the whole rigmarole, but you still get nothing. So we lost like 1 month's pay. So even if the nice title like manager, you're not immune. You still get that.
And the other thing is, if you go to Social Security's assistance, work and income will go, but you should have been paid it, so we got to base it on what you should have been paid, so we're not going to help you as well. Even that if you're having money withheld and you go to them for emergency help, they sometimes, depending on the case manager you get, either they go and, yes, here's a food grant to tie you over for food, or no, sorry, we're not, no, sorry, you should have been paid. It's this issue. Not realizing that, when you're in the law says one thing, but if people aren't following the law, how do you sit there and get an instant response if the person purposely drags the heel? I mean, the great example is in here, as I think you emailed me earlier, was Darling Tana need to urgently leave the house. And that's an example of dragging the heels. If you have a Darling Tana dragging the heels, they ain't going to sit down there and actually change getting paid out. It's and that's the thing that's going to be out there, and especially if it's deliberate. I mean, I remember one particular store manager at one of the jobs where I'm best friends with the owner, but the store manager was so focused on getting a payment incentive bonus to keeping labour down, he was shaving off hours left, right, and centre off and manipulating people's hours so he get that incentive bonus. If I went and took legal action, I'm taking it against my best friend. I can't take it against the actual criminal who did the job, because it's a civil matter with a limited liability company, not a criminal matter with the actual perpetrator.
I think the fact too that it's a civil issue really shows and highlights the power balance between the employer and the employee. Considering that, if, like Ibrahim just said, if you steal $1 from your boss, you're screwed. Whereas if your boss steals $1 from you, who cares?
Yeah,
I want to share like a story because I'm back in the union movement and I'm an organizer now and. So just recently, this is the ongoing issue, and I can't go into my details, but I'll just share the story. It just the scale of the issue in this country. And so a big cleaning company lost a contract, right, in one of the big local government sites. And so our members we asked the new company, okay, you have to take over these employees under the Part 6A legislation. They will be supposed to... they should be transferred with all terms and conditions, and which we agreed. The incoming employer did the right thing. They took over these employees. So the previous employer got all their leave entitlements. Some of these people have been working for years and years. They accumulated shitload of like a lot of leave. Because they wanted this for special, they want to go to they're gonna go to islands, to do the family wedding, family funeral, or whatever. Like this, they accumulated for special moments, and then so we so they first thing they asked, well, what's gonna happen to our entitlements? We told them, well, you've been transferred under Part 6A, so you're safe. So we talking to both employers. And we gonna, we told this is what happened all the time. And then the previous employer, basically, they started to drag their heels. We emailed them, hey, what's going on? Can you please, and we asked the new employer, hey, can you put the, the invoice together and send these people so they can pay the leave entitlements and pass it to you? Because people want to go, Christmas is coming, And then they just emailed them. They first said that, yeah, we're working on this. It's a little bit complicated. And for 2.5 months, they drag. And now I'm hearing that they're going into liquidation. So that means these people could be losing thousands of hours collectively, and which, it was tens of thousands of dollars. So the poor people these people like that, well, they happen to be on living wage because it's a local government site. But these are the most vulnerable people. This employer, they deliberately have been dragging this. Now they're stealing their money. So what is the justice here? This is active. This is a wage theft effectively. And the law should be very clear that this employer, if you don't pay this, if you don't pay these people their entitlement, you're going to go to prison. You're going to be fined and you're going to go to prison. If this were the other way around, these people would be already in prisons. So that is justice.
Yeah. Do we have any payroll companies? Now, I do know that Datacom does this, and Thank You Payroll is another one. And I do know Henry does this for contractors, where when you... so in the case of Thank You Payroll, the employer pays the gross figure to Thank You Payroll. Thank You Payroll takes out the deductions and then pays the difference to the employee. And then pays the PAYE and the KiwiSaver to the to IRD, and if there's any court stuff in there, redistribute it to the courts. Is there a payroll company out there that would say, do your holiday pay and your sick leave pay percentages and hold that into account and trust? So even when there's situations like this, or as I know as a small business owner, if say you had to pay out 3 weeks worth of wages on the cash flow in there, that it won't affect the day-to-day operations of the business, but it ensures that the employees will get what they're entitled to. Is there any payroll providers that do something like that?
I'm not quite sure about that. I think every employer that I personally deal with is you, that Datacom. to pay to facilitate the payments. But I'm not actually. I will look into it. But I'm
yeah, because that's something that could actually be pushed along for government contracts, is to say that you must use payroll company to pay your wages. Because the thing is, indirectly, the reputation is, say, the local government or the government department, indirectly is the employer. So that could be something in place where it could, if there is the event of a liquidation in place, at least the holiday pay and the wages are locked away. Because, like, in a accounting sense for business, you should be accounting for in your equation 20% above the hourly wage once you take into account for holiday pay, sick leave, ACC levies, KiwiSaver employer contributions, that sort of stuff. It's about 20% in addition to the normal hourly wage. So,
and a lot of the companies that we deal with are, not all of them, but a lot of them are Australian based as well, and their payrolls would be even based in Australia, and that makes really the whole thing challenging. Like the whole, like you just dealing with some like insignificant managers here, but like the big bosses and the payrolls are back in Australia, and they keep telling, oh, this is in Australia, that's why we don't have a control over it. The best we can do is we're just gonna chase it up. So like in many ways, it's pretty challenging.
Yeah. Does it have bipartisan support, Ibrahim? Does your bill have bipartisan?
No. It only just scraped past second reading thanks to New Zealand First.
So what happened was when it was introduced last year, the first reading, I think it was August 2023. I introduced the bill, did the first reading, and then referred the bill to select committee, the education workforce that I happened to be was at the time part of. So after I left the parliament, I gave the bill to Camilla Belch, who is also the spokesperson for employment for our party. So the select committee basically is only National Act, Labour and Greens. I think there is some more, Greens. And I don't know if the party Maori, they're definitely not New Zealand First. So the select committee, they have the right at the majority. So it's actually, they voted it down. They recommended the House that they don't pass this bill. So Camilla has done a good job, basically lobbying the New Zealand First MPs. I have written to all of them, including Winston Peters, reminding him that you can
also think Taylor Arnell and I had a good conversation about it, and I could tell he personally wanted it to be passed. And I do believe he also did his bit as well to try and get it across the line.
Good to know that. Thank you for doing that. So, basically, what they said now, Act and National, they very solid. It's a big no. They said that they would never support this. They basically saying that the current regime is enough to deal with this issue. This is just additional cost to the employers, even though this actually has nothing to do with employers that respect the law. There is no cost associated to ethical employers. This is actually targets the bad apples, the bad employers who do this, who practice this ugly practices. But they, at any circumstance, they said they're not going to support it. I tried to lobby some of them. I have spoken to quite a few. It's actually the first day that the first reading happened and we voted, we happened to have a majority at the time. One of the senior MPs at the time, we just popped out of the chamber, and he told me that I'm not sure that we're doing the right thing about this, Ibrahim. And thank you for actually sharing your story, and thank you for being solid on this. It's your value. It's something you stand up. He told me that he was not sure that they were doing the right thing. I told him, well, you're one of the senior MPs. You need to talk to them. So anyway, so New Zealand First just voted in the second reading. They said that they're gonna have a lot of questions during the committee stage. They will be, teasing out a lot of questions. I'm pretty sure that Camilla is gonna do a good job, and she's gonna answer their questions. And hopefully, then they will, if they vote for it in the third reading, then it's gonna pass. But if they somehow change their mind, and then the bill is not gonna pass, unfortunately.
Now, just for those who are looking up there. So I'll put on the committee on the screen here. And yes, there is no breakdown of, so there is only National, ACT, Labour and Greens on the committee.
Yeah.
So that's all that's on the Education Workforce Committee. Oh, and the Greens person down the bottom, Lawrence Zunan. So just for those who are wondering in there. So let's get to see Carl Bates on his first speech in the House on the bill, and let's see what he has said about why it should not pass.
Speaker, and thanks for the opportunity to speak on the Crimes Theft by Employment Amendment Bill. I thought, given there has been several weeks since we last considered this bill, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, I thought I would just take a moment to remind us of the bill in front of the House. Madam Speaker, this bill was introduced to the House during the 53rd Parliament and was then taken over by Camilla Bellich of the opposition as a private member's bill in the 54th Parliament. The bill would insert a new section, 220 AA, into the Crimes Act 1961 to provide that an employer's intentional failure to pay an employee any money owed in relation to that employment is theft. Madam Speaker, the bill details that theft by an employer in the context of this bill, should it be passed by this House, would have a maximum penalty of 1 year's imprisonment, a fine of $5,000 or both. In any other case, the maximum penalty would be a fine of $30,000. So this bill was brought to essentially ensure that in circumstances where an employer intentionally steals money from an employee, essentially by not paying them, that employer would be held accountable under the criminal jurisdiction as opposed to the civil jurisdiction. One of the challenges that we traversed when we went through the Select Committee process, chaired by Katie Nimmin, member for Napier, was what is exactly the size of the problem that this bill is trying to solve? What are the number of employers that are actually undertaking theft from their employees? Through that Select Committee process, we worked through a number of amendments to try and clarify some of the intent. The amendments, all amendments of the bill, through Select Committee were unanimously adopted by the Select Committee, Madam Speaker. The recommendation of the Select Committee on the bill as a whole, though, by majority, was that it doesn't get passed by this House. However, the amendments were accepted by majority. The first amendment and thing we tried to clarify through the Select Committee process was the meaning of an employment agreement. We thought that it was important that the meaning of an employment agreement had the same meaning as in Section 5 of the Employment Relations Act 2020. And so there was a new subsection 3 inserted to make sure that was clear to anyone who was reading the bill. The second amendment that we traversed was clarifying the coverage for home workers, Madam Speaker. So under the Employment Relations Act, employment agreement includes a contract for services between an employer and a home worker, the term home worker being defined in Section 5 of that Act. And we thought it was important that we made clear that this covered home workers should it be passed by this House. The third thing that we wanted to make sure was clarified through an amendment was what entitlements are covered. And we spent some time as a Select Committee, Madam Speaker, determining or looking at what exactly would qualify as theft by an employer, how you would determine what the entitlements that were covered are. And so we needed to make sure that this was clear in the bill when it was presented back to the House. So we thought that the bill should be clearer in the payment in question, being the payments required under an Act of Parliament, because often an employer can choose to pay additional things to an employee. There might be particular circumstances when they provide additional benefits that aren't necessarily part of the package of employment, and so we thought it really needed to be clear what the bill covered, and we defined that as being payments required under an Act of Parliament. The challenge, however, even with these amendments in place, Madam Speaker, is at the end of the day, the relationship between an employer and an employee is currently covered under the civil jurisdiction, under civil law. And essentially, this agreement wants to take part of that relationship and put it into the criminal jurisdiction. At the moment, we have three pieces of legislation that essentially provide an umbrella over these sorts of circumstances. We have the Employment Relations Act, we have the Minimum Wage Act, and we have the Wages Protection Act, which really is related to unlawful deductions by an employer. This additional piece of legislation would add an unnecessary piece of legislative compliance when there are already existing mechanisms to ensure that employers appropriately remunerate and pay their employees. Indeed, the Community Law Centre's Aotearoa expressed concerns about how this could be difficult to prove. One of the things that came up through the process of consideration in the Select Committee was when is withholding a payment from an employee intentional? And would you end up inadvertently being in a scenario where you have an employer criminally liable because there was a mistake? And look, to be fair, we addressed a number of these issues, but not to a level of satisfaction, I think, Madam Speaker, that would make sure that employers could feel comfortable that should this piece of legislation be part of the statutes in this House, that they couldn't get caught up in unnecessary and costly and additional layers of compliance that this House would essentially burden them with. And I don't know about you, Madam Speaker, when you are traversing the mighty...
You don't bring the Speaker into the debate, in this debate.
When Madam Speaker, when I am traversing the mighty electorate of Wanganui, which I know you happen to pass through from time to time, but the Wanganui, wonderful Wanganui electorate, when I'm talking to both employees and employers, Madam Speaker, what they're looking for right now is certainty about the future of the revenue of their businesses so that they can pay their staff, and employees are looking for certainty of their jobs and the relationship that they have in terms of their employment relationship with the success and the continuing success of those businesses. And I think really both parties are aligned in wanting to ensure we reduce the legislative burden, the red tape, the compliance that sits around businesses so that the money that they have can go into where it's most needed, and that is keeping those businesses open and functional and returning a return, and ensuring that we're able to provide wage growth to employees. And every time we add another layer of legislative compliance, we just add something else that business is going to have to deal, or those businesses are going to have to deal with. And that sort of relates to the other part of moving the relationship about employment from the civil jurisdiction to the criminal jurisdiction. And even the NZTU agreed that it could be difficult to prove when a non-natural person was being dishonest. That it would be challenging to exactly understand in a court of law when a company, as opposed to a person behind it, when a company was being dishonest in not paying an employee. So not only do we have a very smallly defined or ill-defined lack of clarity around the size of the problem, we have a solution to the problem that is going to create another level of legislative burden that's going to muddy the waters of the employment relationship between the civil and the criminal jurisdictions, and we're going to add to the challenge that there already can occur in the employment relationship when you have those small number of employees that are vexatious in their relationship with their employers. And so, Madam Speaker, as per the Select Committee report, I do not commend this bill to the House.
Abraham?
What a 5 minutes of rubbish. Just going around and repeating himself over and over and over. Look, they would have to say these things. You know, it's he basically said that what we're looking for is employers want, you know, like a constant revenue that doesn't stop, and employees are looking for a stable job. Yes, when you go into the business, the intention is to make money, but to make money, you don't make money by breaking the law, by exploiting people, people who are already underpaid, undervalued, people who just made their ends meet, people who are in constant struggles. And like I said, the vast majority of New Zealand businesses are ethical, responsible. They do their job. They look after their employees. But there are employees who don't do these things. And yes, when as an employee, you go to the job, you look, the first thing is getting the job. But just because you got a job, it doesn't mean that you should be you should be quiet when the moment that you're exploited, your money be taken away, you're getting ripped off. But look, National and ACU would say a whole lot of things. And David Seymour said that last year that this was actually in the media. It's because Ibrahim faced this problem. Now he wants to change the world. There is no problem at all. And the existing regime is enough to deal with the issue. It's not a big problem. You know why? It's because the people who are targeted by this, people who actually face or exploited by, wage theft, are poor people. They are insignificant to people like David Seymour and to the person that...
Imagine if I walked into David Seymour, up to his wallet, and Sorry, what is Stacey on about? I've got nothing playing. Okay.
So the reality is migrant exploitation and wage theft are rampant. They're ugly. It's widespread, and it needs to stop. And it's not going to stop unless we do something about it. And the only thing we can do is we should legislate. And the only thing that's going to stop these employers from practicing this, from stealing the employees' money, is actually by changing the law and sending them a clear and strong warning that if you do this, you're going to be fined and your ass is going to end up in prison.
Yeah.
I just want to... Oh, sorry, Sam. Go ahead.
And also then you'll have on your record that red flags every time you try to apply to, say, employ migrants in the future or bank loans and that sort of thing. It's going to show on your criminal record wage theft.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Is that the one? Is it some relevant case? Would be the current conundrum with Darlene Tana that the Greens you guys are going through? Is that part of the? Because I think the husband is the one that runs it, right? So how could she be related?
Yes, I can speak to that one. Being a Greenie myself. So what happened there is in the executive report, it showed that Darlene had knowledge of being underpaid and being asked to work hours and being given inappropriate work that didn't match what their visa allowed them to do. So
okay.
So that's why I would call what she did worker exploitation.
Right. So she had the knowledge, but she's not actually a director of the company, or she is?
She did a lot of admin work behind the scenes.
Okay. So she had the knowledge of it. Oh, I see. Okay.
When she was confronted by the party.
Yeah, it's typically in a husband and wife business that you often get the wife doing the bookwork. I mean, except if you see of Air New Zealand. I don't think Amanda Luxon did the payroll in the GST, but that is very common in a husband-wife situation that often the male spouse might be the one who runs the day-to-day running of the business, and the wife comes in and does all the paperwork to keep all the I's and T's, in theory, dotted.
And she was very dishonest about it when she got asked about her own party, and she said that I didn't know anything. I've resigned. A long time ago. God, I don't know anything about this. I'm very innocent. And then they dig and it was quite the other way around.
Just before you move on, Sam, I just want to make a quick comment about what Carl was talking about. One thing that really bothered about what Carl was saying was that he was using half-truths. Like, as you can see in the chat, I had to post, this is actually what the CTU
and the
said
CTU.
on the...
He said NZTU.
NZTU. Sorry. Oh, God, my dyslexia. Yes, so what they actually stated, basically they said, well, if corporations are going to be acknowledged as people, they should be treated as such. So... Yeah,
bring the corporate death penalty in, as Jake Huger on the Young Turk says.
But yeah, you'll notice that Mike Butterick also does the same in his submission as well.
Yeah,
it's misleading actually. Half of his speech was misleading, and he knows that he was lying.
Yeah. Let's get to Duncan Webb.
Madam Speaker, the reason Carl Bates' speech was largely incoherent is because the thinking behind it is equally incoherent. The idea that because this is the pearl. The idea that because an employment relationship is a civil contract, then an employer shouldn't be liable for stealing is the parallel of that is if a person working at a bar nicks money out of the till, it's a civil relationship. We don't want that to be criminally liable. Of course, an employee who steals from their employer is criminally liable. If they intentionally deprive their employer of property, then they're criminally liable. But this is Mr. Bates' argument. It's all a bit confusing. If the employer intentionally deprives an employee of their property, that's not criminal. The asymmetry of that relationship is typical of the National Party. This is not some complex bill. It just says this. If you steal stuff from your employee, you're criminally liable. If you know that you're obligated to pay, you've got the money, but you intentionally choose not to pay them, you intentionally deprive them of their entitlement to wages, you're criminally liable. And what does the criminal law do? It sets boundaries between right and wrong. And to steal from your employee is wrong. It should be criminal. the idea that it's a bit too much admin, in fact, the member used the term red tape, as if paying your employee honestly is red tape. That is shameful. That's someone, I think, who once called himself an accountant. And yet here he is defending the right of employers to steal from their employees by intentionally withholding wages illegally. This is not a complicated bill. And as for the difficulties of prosecution and what's the burden of proof and evidence, well, that's a prosecutorial decision. And as we know, the Solicitor General has a very fulsome set of guidelines on when to make a prosecution. There are two fundamental elements. Is the evidence there? Does it meet the evidential threshold? And is it in the public interest to prosecute? It's not rocket science. So, yes, if the evidence is cloudy, you probably won't get a prosecution. If it's not in the public interest, you won't get a prosecution. But where we have a clear case of an insurer knowingly taking wages from their employee, then prosecution should and will follow. That's why this is a bill that's properly before this House, and I'm hopeful that other parties in the House other than the National Party will support it. I'm sure the ACT Party, who are property mad, will support it, because the right to property is one of their foundation stones. And our former friends, who used to be our coalition partners, New Zealand First, I'm hopeful will stand up to what they say they stand for, which is the rights of workers, as does the Labor Party, and make sure this bill passes to the House. As for the National Party, dancing on the head of a pin with ridiculous and incoherent arguments about red tape and the civil and criminal distinction and employment relationship really shows them up. They should be ashamed of themselves. Very proud that Camilla Bellich has brought this bill to the House. I'm very hopeful we'll see this through to the next stage so we can look after workers' wages properly. I absolutely commend this to the House.
Mike.
He knows how to call out bullshit.
That's very solid, the speech right there is from the law professor, from the man who actually knows what he's talking about, Duncan Webb. I mean, it's a black and white. It's black and white. We're not here looking to add additional costs to employers. We're not here to add additional legislative burden to the employers. What we're saying here is that stop stealing people's money, employees' money. It's simple as that. If you stop that, and then this bill has nothing to do with you. If you keep stealing, and then yes, you will be caught by this. It's black and white. You don't need to be a rocket science professor to understand this. And the National Party MPs, I would say all of them, when they stand up in this House to speak against this bill, they don't believe a word of what they say. They don't believe on it. And like this senior MP who told me that I'm not sure that we're doing the right thing by voting down this bill, Ibrahim. But good on you for bringing it to this House anyway. So they all feel the same way. But for them, this is ideological. For them, employees stealing from employees, employers stealing from employees, it's fine because employers are their friends. So yeah, it's just simple as that. But at the same time, it's kind of sad.
Interesting point of view. Yeah, I think there are situations. I mean, that what you have mentioned, Ibrahim, and what Duncan Webb say holds important fundamental point. I mean, I like to give credit where it's due. For example, even in the brokerage industry, right, in insurance, the principal consultant, right, he's the one that gets all the money coming first before he pays the employees the commissions. But then because he's in charge of everything, he can actually have all the funds of yours, which is supposed to be partially given to you, which is your commission, use it for anything he wants. And then when there are issues where, like the great financial crisis where all the people stop paying, so you have all these paybacks, then the brokers working the employees will get one big load of debt. Okay, so this is also, I think, one of the issues. So it doesn't even only be employee and employer, it's also even in brokerage relationships where they can let you hold the whole thing and then you get all the problems and they get away with it. So there's also that side of it that needs to be looked into. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even though I'm from the centre, but I can see this is also a good bill to look at least hopefully that it does highlight the discrepancies and the loopholes. I mean, look, we don't have issues like that with warehouse, with no laming, right? They really follow all the rules and of payments, regulations.
Yeah.
So it's only like what you say, those fly by night, companies or whatever.
I like the term.
Just
Considering I've been told my business is in a way in that sort of aspect, but then on the other
hand, also if an employer paid, well, kind of short to pay the employee by mistake, by accident, they would straight away fix it. In our collective, for example, in Mecca, was in a cleaning contract with all the employers. It says that like the short pay needs to be rectified within 72 hours maximum. And the employers who make honest mistakes, they fix it straight away. But those who do it with the intention of keeping the money, they muck around. Oh yeah, we'll fix it. It's in Australia.
We'll just count on the never.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's see what Laura's General Electric MP, Mike Butterick, has to say.
All right.
And see if the people of Ekatahuna are going to sit down there and call bullshit on it.
You might say he wanted to
Madam Speaker, and good evening. I haven't spoken in the House for a while, so perhaps I'd just like to start with a shout out to all of those in the Wairarapa electorate, from Central Hawke's Bay, Darua and the Wairarapa. Spring is here. Most have had tax relief. Interest rates are on the way down. Hard-working parents are now able to get family boost payments. Commodity prices are better than they have been. And just in case the news hasn't got through, announced today, the inflation genie is back in the box. Inflation is now at 2.2% for the year ended September, and the darkness before dawn, as Nicola Willis previously described the state of the economy under the previous administration, is finally starting to lift. Thank you for trusting us as a government to manage the economy out of recession.
And that's your minute to do general debate. Now you will speak to the bill.
Yeah, but the bill.
Thank you. Now, the Crimes Theft by Employer Amendment Bill in the name of Kamala Balich is not one that we can support. The bill has been introduced for the purpose of criminalising the act of employers intentionally failing to pay employees rather than treating it under civil law. The main provisions: the bill would insert new section 220AA into the Crimes Act 1961 to provide that an employer's intentional failure to pay an employee any money owed in relation to the employment is theft. The bill would also set maximum penalties for this new offence of theft by employer. If the employer is an individual, the maximum penalty would be 1 year's imprisonment, a fine of $5,000 or both. In any other case, the maximum penalty would be a fine of $30,000. We have a view in the National Party that a significant number of employers are good employers. Yes, there will always be a very small number of employers that aren't, but that doesn't mean we need to run around and impose new legislation to address an issue that already has a clear pathway of resolution. That pathway, which I might add, is a long-held practice in New Zealand's civil jurisdiction of addressing issues of the sort that this bill seeks to address, or reinvent, of doing so through a civil process. This bill is unnecessary as there are prevailing mechanisms that actually already exist. The Employment Relations Act contains provisions to address circumstances where an employee isn't paid paid less than the amount stated in their employment agreement. The Holidays Act contains provisions that address non-compliance and also allow for interest to be paid on any unpaid entitlements. And the Wages Protection Act and the Minimum Wage Act contain provisions preventing unlawful wage deductions. Transferring the ability to adjudicate a dispute to a criminal court won't speed up the process. It will almost certainly slow it down, which will not result in any improvement in outcome. All this bill will do is transfer said disputes from the employment relations space for potentially deductions from pay slips and not paying into the criminal prosecution space. This, Madam Speaker, will more than likely result in a number of unintended and unnecessary consequences. So to sum up, Madam Speaker, at present the failure to pay an employee is currently dealt with as a civil matter under the Employment Relations Act, where the mechanisms I've already mentioned exist, where the employer and the employee have a clear duty to act in good faith, and penalties already exist if they don't do just that. An actual theft of money is dealt with under criminal law. And I refer to an article 23rd of May 2023 that says, and I quote, "Such a law could, however, potentially make it far more challenging to undertake a deduction from wages, even in valid cases, and has the potential to foreseeably expose the employer to criminal liability, or at least the threat of such risk." The Wages Protection Act 1983 and 40 years of case law makes it very clear on how a deduction is to be actioned. The advent of this may give miscreant employees more impetus to refuse to allow deductions in legitimate cases, end of quote. So we don't need to impose further unnecessary complications on those in our region that are the lifeblood of our local economies, those small, medium businesses that have persevered for far too long under the burden of a recession they didn't cause, Not now, when there's light at the end of the tunnel. It's not necessary to implement new and needless legislation, adding frustration, cost and complexity. That's why National doesn't support this bill, Madam Speaker. Perhaps Labor may want to reflect on this bill. Perhaps, Madam Speaker, they've been sidetracked dreaming up further ways of relieving those in our communities that have endured so much for so long under their administration. The Labor Party's latest attempt to do this seems to be fixated on not only more rules, but more tax. They seem quite addicted to tax, Madam Speaker. I'll get to the bill, but they'd tax our land, they'd tax our beds, and they'd tax the tables upon which we're fed. Yes, back to the bill. All this bill does is transfer disputes, potentially around deductions from pay slips and not paying, from the employment relations space into the criminal space. And we believe that would have all manner of unintended consequences. We heard in the Select Committee from the community law centres of Aotearoa that they expressed concern that the offence would be difficult to prove and easy to defend, noting that dishonesty offences are typically very difficult to prove. Business New Zealand noted the very high threshold that beyond reasonable doubt imposes in criminal cases, and compared to the balance of probabilities standard in the employment court, and how this makes proving intention especially burdensome for prosecutors. The New Zealand Council of Trade Unions pointed out that mens rea can be very hard to establish for non-natural persons, as my parliamentary colleague Carl Bates alluded to earlier. It was a very good speech from Carl, the very hard-working member for Parliament from Wanganui. It's a great electorate, that, almost as good as the Wairarapa. The New Zealand Law Society, they submitted that Section 219 of the Crimes Act 1961 frames theft with reference to dishonestly and without claim of right, taking, using or dealing with property. They contended that the use of intentionally in Clause 4 could inadvertently capture situations where employers genuinely withhold paying employees money owed. That Clause 4 could create situations where employers are made criminally liable for not paying money that is legitimately and intentionally disputed, while the employer lacks the intention to deprive their employee of what they are owed. And overall, there are existing provisions in the Employment Relations Act, as mentioned previously, to protect employees with pay disputes, and the use of the Crimes Act would have too many adverse consequences and be too difficult to prove. So, as I said, Madam Speaker, the National Party, apologies. No, I can do lots of pages if you like.
The member was reading quotes.
I could finish my poem if the member over there would like. It took me a while to write. I was just talking about how they tax our tractor and they tax our ute.
Now you're back off the bill.
Back on track, Madam Speaker.
Back to the bill.
So, to finish off, National won't be supporting this bill. It's unnecessary. It just adds more regulations, another complexity that employers don't need. There are many mechanisms that already exist to protect employees. Madam Speaker, we do not support this bill.
Is Mike a cherry farmer? Because that was a lot of cherry picking. And also, this is coming from the guy who wants to put a fucking road toll on, the
hard-working Tauranga locals.
Yeah, it's like, dude, come on.
And for someone who's here, National and ACT have always prided themselves, we need to give them a short, sharp shock. So, when you sit down there and don't turn up to your benefit seminar, we're going to cut your benefit. Ask questions later, because, that's how we sit down. If you sit down there and, do a rain, we need a short, sharp shock. So when you steal someone's wages, you need a short, sharp shock, having the police knocking on your door in front of your wife and your kids going about wage theft, or in front of all your employees. Oh, no, we don't want the embarrassment of being emitted with our bully boy behaviour. We've got to sit there and say it's a civil matter.
Dave on the chat thread said that he can't even stay on track. That's right. He was just he spent over 1 minute just ranting about the economy. The economy is turning around because of the steps that has been already taken by previous government, and it's not because of what they have done. What they have done is actually killing the economy. Look, two things here. He said that this is the vast majority of New Zealand employers, business owners are honest people. We agree. However, he also said that there are tiny minorities that do this. Just because it's been perpetuated by a tiny minority, it's okay. It doesn't need to be legislated. That's the message that I got from him. Other than that, he was just uttering nonsense, rubbish. At the end of the day, I do not expect anything from the national. Like I said before, these people don't believe it's word that they're saying, and deep inside they probably believe this legislation, this bill is the right thing to do. They know that a lot of hardworking Kiwis get ripped off by by their employers. And it's like I said, they got paid millions of dollars by big businesses to be elected. So they have to do this, otherwise they're not going to get a penny next time. So that's the only thing I can say. It really is just, I have nothing to say on this.
Yeah, for Rajan on there about saying, is benefit payment a civil matter? Paying the benefits, yes, but I can also tell you right now, if you have a debt created as a beneficiary, before you can even go, show me the money, or show me the breakdown how you came to that debt, they're already taking it off you at $10.50 a week, and that even if you go, oh, but I don't agree with the debt, suspend the payments. No, we don't suspend payments here. I can assure you that's right. Show me the money. Oh, I can just assure you it's right. So, and I mean, that's like a very standard approach that happens at work and income. You have to go, well, if you can't show me, can you show a high court judge? Oh, no. Go, if you don't turn up in front of a high court judge, I'll ask them to send a warrant to arrest you. And if that's in front of another beneficiary, that will be fine.
Someone gets Sam orange juice, vitamin C, distress.
Yeah, but basically, so, but there's something there. So, however, if you have a debt, we say an employer's withholding money, you can't just go, well, I can just take it out $10.50 a week until it's paid off. You can't just go to the courts and say, put an attachment order against my employer's pay packet. It doesn't work that way. You need to go through a whole process to prove it. But, how hard are you, are you going to be actually able to get that? So so this is the short, sharp shock people, the poor, the vulnerable, whereas, you can't even have but it's wrong according to Mike Butterick or to, what's that guy up in Northland, MP for Northland, Grant McKellen, who sits there and says he doesn't want people knocking on the door at 6:30 at night saying you've been accused of wage theft. The short, sharp shock process should not apply to the employer. But why can't it apply to the employer? I'll put it this way. If you're an employer who just sits down there and just keeps doing that, having a police officer or two turn up to your house will scare the living shit out of you if you've been intentionally exploiting someone. That might be the corrective tool that's needed to get payment. But sitting there and saying, but we can't have that method, or let's sit there and put it on the never and devolve it to the courts. That doesn't sit there and feel justice, And I mean, you can't even sit there and say you're having money withheld from there. You can't walk into, say, Mike Butterick's farm, if let's say he's the employer, and sit down there and take, all his sheep, equivalent to the wage packet, or a bunch of tools to a wage packet, because that would be theft as a servant for the employee. And I'm pretty sure Mike would actually want that person dragged through the coals if someone went onto his farm and sat there and did that. And on top of that, hey, you can take the jelly bean jar that our fingers in his office, which Laura probably remembers what I'm talking about in there. But,
and he was also annoyingly, he was misrepresenting some of those submissionists.
Yes, he was.
The CTU, yep. and he was lying. That's not what they said. I mean, as a union every union organizer can tell you it's very, very easy to prove that if the employee, I mean, in Mecca, we got, if the employer doesn't pay, it was in 72 hours. It's clearly stated in our collective. If they don't rectify, if they don't pay the employee within 72 hours, they're lost wages, and then it becomes a wage theft. Okay, it would have but when people deliberately decide to lie, there is nothing much you can do about it.
Yeah.
It is interesting too that, I mean, another angle that may need to be looked at also will be commission paid workers. You see, there's those like wages and salary. You have all the rights and all the rules and all those. Mm-hmm. But for those who are contracted to, like the Uber drivers and like brokers in insurance, in money broking, there is no protection really, because if you're the principal consultant, right, or the owner, right, he controls all the funds, so it goes through him, right? So you may have your what they call brokerage accounts, but you don't have access to it. So you can use your money, play it around, buy shares, and then the next moment you might be bankrupted or accused of fraud. But he can even use your accounts to do it, and then he gets away with it, and you have to, like, go through all the things you have to go through and falsely accused of fraud, be bankrupted. So I think there needs to be maybe following like the Australian and US side, where they have protection mechanisms also for contractors to employers. Means they don't get paid unless they do a sales, which is probably worse than, at least wages, you get the wage, you get holidays, right? But for the commission ones, I'm not sure whether Uber is.
I mean, I can completely relate to that, being self-employed myself. And, I can tell you, since Tauranga, was it local bodies, I've pretty much basically been backwards and forward on the breadline. Like, I don't know how I'm going to pay my $800 GST bill that's due on the 29th. I'm going to pay it somehow, but I know that particular side of it in there. There's no such thing called holidays. I mean, why do I take the coffee cart to Vinegar Hill for New Year's? So I can sit there and earn an income while having a holiday. That sort of thing there. But yeah, that you are right. Like, should it just stop at the wage worker, or should it go to, say, the what would be equivalent of a wage salary worker, of like a commissioned like insurance sales rep, is like what you said. Should that also be brought into the scope of the law? Actually, was that the intention to include that in the scope of law, Ibrahim?
What was that? Say that again, Sam.
So if you had to say commission-based employees such as insurance brokers, where their only payment is based on commission, would that also be taken into the same account?
Would they be also protected in your bill?
Would they be protected?
Which should you include it in the note?
In my view, they should, and if it can be proven, it's you basically asking me is should they be considered under this bill? Is that the question, Sam?
Yes, that would be the question. Yeah, or has that part been looked at?
Any employee that's contracted somehow to do any kind of job for employer, falls into this legislation or into this bill. So if they're not getting paid, if their wages are being withheld somehow against their will, then yes.
Yeah. Okay, let's get on to Helen White and hear her.
Speaker. I wanted to start with something that a friend of mine who's another employment lawyer once said to me, and it really stuck. When you don't have capital, time is what you've got to sell. That's all you've got. So when somebody takes your time and contracts that time and then takes it from you, it's actually more serious than it is in many situations. And I want to give an example of where I've seen this impact. I had a case when I was a junior, so I had a senior lawyer and I was the junior, and it was in the Employment Relations Authority. It was probably the tribunal back then. It was quite a while ago, and it was with Oak Calcutta Restaurant. They took on some Indian employees from India. They took $2,500 for them to come into the country, and then they employed them on contracts which said that they would be paid $350. I think $250 was actually paid, but they had a contract that said $350, and then they had another contract with this company seal on it saying the lesser amount. When they made a fuss about that, they were working, by the way, 92.5 hours a week. They were working lunch and dinner. When they made a fuss about that at all, they were chucked out on the street and they were accused, basically told that they would have to leave the country. I remember threats that were made about how they would never be paid, and they weren't paid at that point. So the employer intentionally took their money. They had children back in India. They were terrified about losing their ability to work here. That's an example of what happens when you don't watch. What was the strangest thing about this case is halfway through the case, we were talking about the fact that they paid this extra money to come to the country, and the tribunal member wouldn't believe it because they'd never seen it before. And it became something that was really, I look back and I think, if we had only noticed what was going on and how serious it was, if we'd only noticed, perhaps we would have avoided the pain that was caused to so many more employees in this country by that kind of habit and that behaviour, which we had a blind spot for in New Zealand. So while I absolutely think small businesses are good employers often, and medium ones, and I am absolutely appalled that this would be suggested as a punishment to them, it is not. Those people pay. They pay their workers. It isn't always the case. Sometimes you get this kind of scurrilous act. And the word key here was intentional. You had to be at the beyond reasonable doubt stage to meet this test. It was when you intentionally took someone else's money, and that might be all they had. That might be all that they had to trade on. And you took it and you disempowered them. And it is a power relationship, and we accept that in the employment situation. Now, what's the difference? Why is it that Camilla Bellich and Ibrahim Omer went for a criminal standard here? Why is it? Because when we say this is a crime, we say this is serious. We take it seriously. It's very different. And there's another really practical reason. Because the state looks after people in the criminal area. Criminal victims, the state looks after them. It says, no, that's not okay. You can't take that person's money intentionally because they worked hard, and you must not take their money. That's called theft. And it's serious, and we take it seriously. And the state prosecutes, not the individual. Think about my 3 men at Okaukara. Do you think they had any money? They didn't even have anywhere to sleep that night. They were not going to take a civil prosecution through without the help of someone. And in that case, it was actually the help of a union. They hadn't actually joined, but the union stepped in and helped. And that's how they got there. But most of the time, those people, they're never going to take a case. They're never going to take a civil case. Now, one of the saddest aspects of that case, and we did win the case, and they didn't actually close up, did end up paying those guys out. One of the saddest aspects of that case was they only got paid for 40 hours a week because the rest wasn't even contracted, apparently. So there was so stolen time as far as I'm concerned there too. We have a long way to go in this country before we get the settings right. And the first thing we have to accept is that there is a power imbalance. And we have to accept that people in this situation, they deserve as much protection as we give other victims. These are victims, and tonight, if you vote against this bill, you're voting against the recognition of people who have been exploited and power has been misused. The power of money is a big thing in the life of somebody who hasn't got it. Thank you. Cameron Brewer.
Very fiery speech from former employment lawyer Helen White. Very good speech. Very again full of facts. At the end of the day, I think one thing I can take from her speech is the power dynamics, the power imbalance between the employer and the employee. Chasing your lost wages through the civil, just doesn't work. But also, a lot of people who get exploited or their wages stolen, they happen to be either they're migrant workers or the young people. So in both kids, they both are very vulnerable. I mean, young people, there's always lack of experience in life and fear of consequence to speak up. If I do this job, and then I might not get another job. So I'm just gonna. A young woman, after I introduced this, she shared her story with me, and the way that she was treated by her employer, and she was basically bullied, and her wages were being taken away from her every time she gets paid. She's short paid, and every time she just, you're lazy anyway. She was being called names, and she was being shamed in front of, she said that she's still 10 years on. She's still struggling from that experience. And finally, the employer happened to be someone, he was a lawyer. He knew the law, he knew what he was doing, and he was doing this deliberate. Every paycheck would come short, and she couldn't do much about it because she was young, and she was vulnerable, she was female, and finally the best she could do was she just gave up the job and walked away. And she shared this story, and she told me that feel free to actually share it with New Zealand. So and that's the power imbalance. When someone got all the power, everything, all the keys, all the and the other one is helpless, powerless to speak up. Either they there is also often, if you are a migrant employee, and there is also a language issue. For a lot of these people they hard workers, but English is a big challenge for them. You see, for me, even from the day that I arrived, I could speak fine English, but I would still exploit it. And imagine being a new immigrant and your English is not being up to standard.
I saw this with international students as well. Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah, I worked with international students at Domino's Miramar, and I remember watching one who could barely speak any English to basically overtaking one of the owners on his competency in English. It was pretty amazing watching that over that 2 years, that transformation. Yeah. Do we see what Cameron Brewer sits there and says who?
Oh my God, that guy.
My grandma has told me some interesting stories about him from the good old her friends, the Shepherds, who know Cameron personally.
Madam Speaker, what a bunch of crocodile tears. What a bunch of crocodile tears. Anyone would think that they've never been near the levers of government. Well, can I remind the Labor Party that they've been in and out of government for nearly 100 years. And now, after 6 years, with an absolute majority of 65 MPs and having a full opportunity to put it through as a government bill, you have the tenacity to turn up to Parliament tonight and advocate for workers. And most of you are former constituent MPs. Can I point out some of the MPs here? Can I point out some of the MPs here?
A little bit too much use of the word you tonight from both sides.
Oh, thank you, Madam Speaker. For a second, I thought you were saying I was transgressing from the bill.
No,
but not at all. I know you give us a minute's grace.
You're on the bill. No, you only get half a minute.
Okay, well, let me start that grace period now, Madam Speaker. We are the party of workers, and the Labor Party know that. Shannon Holbert knows that. He knows that the person that represents the workers of Glenfield is Dan Bidwar. He knows that. He knows that. And we're also, Madam Speaker, the party of democracy. And we listen to the parliamentary, non-partisan decisions that come out of the Education and Workforce Select Committee. And can I read this, Madam Speaker, straight off the explanatory note, recommendation of the Education and Workforce Committee that the National Party is taking adherence to here. The Education and Workforce Committee has examined the crimes, bracket theft by employer, close bracket amendment bill, and recommends, by majority, that it not be passed. And so after this, and Camilla Belich knows, this has been going through, this was first reading over 14 months ago, and the scrutiny, the painful scrutiny and examination by the Education and Workforce Select Committee, and that has come out with the recommendation that it not be passed, and now they have the cheek to oppose what our judicious, conscientious and hard-working Education and Workforce Committee have recommended after listening to submissions, after listening to officials, after listening to business groups and industry groups. And Camilla Belich, she can go on as much as she wants, but she had 6 years. She had 6 years. She had 6 years and an absolute majority. She could have stood up in caucus, Madam Speaker, 7 years ago and said, why don't we make this a government bill? I'm so concerned about it. I'm so concerned about it. She could have stood up 3 years ago with 65 MPs. She was jammed in the corner because there were so many MPs. They didn't need to consult with anyone. They didn't need to consult with anyone. They could have just done this on their own. They could have just whipped it up in the caucus room and said, we're passing it. We're so concerned. The crocodile tears that Helen White's been crying tonight. But no, suddenly they get into opposition. And they're all of a sudden interested in this piece of legislation. They're suddenly interested in this piece of legislation. And it's all our fault for ignoring the prosecution, the hard-working, conscientious Select Committee. We are the ones that are listening to the non-partisan Select Committee. The Education and Workforce, Stephen Abel, Committee that decided on merit, and so happened to be majority, that this not be passed. We listen to what select committees have told us and the work that they've done and the examination that they've taken out, and on balance, Madam Speaker, we are not going to go against the Select Committee and their hard work for the last 14 months. We are the party of workers. We are also the party of business. We believe, as my colleague Carl Bates has taken us through chapter and verse, that 10 minutes went so quickly too, how these areas are comprehensively covered, the complexity that this would bring about is not worth going down that track. That's why 100 years of Labor parties have never taken this step. The protection is there. It's well and truly covered in a comprehensive way for New Zealand workers. Mike Buderick went through the different statutes that are in existence to protect workers and the opportunities that are there for those that have had wrongdoing against them. And Madam Speaker, National Party, hand on heart, as the party for workers, cannot support this bill and go against the intentions of the Select Committee.
And for those who are wondering, that Select Committee was a majority of 1 vote.
And also the only national and act that voted against this bill. So there's no New Zealand First were not represented in the committee. So what a lot of rubbish. The biggest he said that national the party for workers.
Yeah, that's laughable.
Put it this way: a flying pig is landing at Wellington Airport at the moment with Cameron Brewer as a passenger.
Yeah. Well, I think
exploiting workers at this stage, based on what I've seen.
I think the other side of the equation. I think as Ibrahim had shared that there are really good employers. who take care of the rights of workers. I mean, okay, we don't want to go into corporations. I mean, there are good even small, medium businesses where you have 30, 40 employees, but they allow them to even have shares in the company, and grow their businesses.
Yep.
So interestingly, I know you guys may not be too happy, but Andrew Bailey does that. The MP for National, he actually lets the workers get a shareholding from his company.
Yep.
So I guess
That's a good thing.
well, there's some good business people. So
Absolutely, yes.
yeah, even Michael Jewellers, Michael Hill, right? They were closing down, but they never said bye workers, lock you up. We don't pay you a cent, but they kind of try to get them re-employed, and so probably. So this is more for the theft, right? The side where you say they have actually taken from the workers. Would that be right to say about this bill?
Well,
no one.
To be clear, I wasn't. Oh, sorry.
Go on, Laura.
Cheers, Ibrahim. To be clear, I wasn't saying that every national member is a rubbish employer. I was just talking about how this guy is misrepresenting workers' experiences and stuff like that. I'm calling him out.
All right.
I think every national MP who spoke on this bill were lying. They were misrepresenting the facts. They were misrepresenting the submission that's been made by other organizations. And the most importantly, they don't believe what they're saying. Like I said, this is the party line. When the party says that we're not supporting this bill, what you believe and what's in your side, what you believe, whether you dislike this or not, you're gonna have to do this. You're gonna have to say this. Or you're gonna have to vote. So I don't actually. I blame the party. I don't blame the individual MPs. It's the party policy. It's the party line. So they have to follow.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, well, let's move on to Shannon Halbert and see his.
Shannon Halbert.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do love a good debate from my friend, my mate over there, Cameron Brewer. The thing I like about him is he plays it straight. You know where you stand. But that was one of the most terrible speeches that I've heard from him. Because, Madam Speaker, he talked about the National Party being the party of workers. In fact, I'll tell you what they're a party of, Madam Speaker. They're a party of cuts. They're a party of chaos. They're a party of broken promises. They're a party that is out of touch, just like the Prime Minister. They're a party of tobacco. And just for Cameron Brewer and Dan Bidwar, they're a party that is closing down the North Shore Women's Centre on the shore. How shameful. Mr. Speaker, it's my privilege. It was my privilege to have delivered a lot of things to the North Shore, unlike those two. Schools, police numbers, you name it. They haven't done anything yet. But Mr. Speaker, tonight it's my privilege to be able to talk about this particular piece of legislation, and I love that I've racked them up, because they know, Mr. Speaker, that they have delivered nothing. They have delivered absolutely nothing to Auckland's North Shore. Just like the Minister of Auckland, they're sold out on Auckland, and they're sold out on our communities. Mr. Speaker, now that they've quieted down, can I acknowledge my colleague, and she hasn't had 6 years in this place, but my colleague, class of 2020, Camilla Bellich, and a good North Coast and North Shore resident herself. There are some good work that she does, but can I acknowledge you, Camilla, and the work that you've put into this particular bill, and also my brother, Ibrahim Omer, for the work that he has done in bringing this bill into the House and carving this particular pathway. I look back, Mr. Speaker, to his maiden speech and his commitment to this House, and absolutely his commitment to workers, and that's what the Labour Party stands for. Mr. Speaker, I just don't understand how it is that the National Party doesn't believe that not paying their employees shouldn't be a criminal offence. How is it that tonight they can vote against this particular bill that sets up a higher threshold when our most vulnerable workers are ripped off by their employers? I remember myself, and I like to think that many people in this House have had a vulnerable moment in employment, perhaps when we were teenagers, perhaps when, like me in hospitality, you had a run-in with the boss and they threatened not to pay you. Well, in fact, Mr. Speaker, this piece of legislation means that you do have to be paid. Mr. Speaker, this bill amends the Crimes Act to clarify that intentionally not paying an employee their wages is, in fact, theft. The law as it stands does not address this, and wage theft is mainly following up through the civil courts rather than enforcement through the police. Mr. Speaker, I like to think that around this House and in many cases today, we have been able to support members' bills on Members' Day because they are particularly good kaupapa.
And this is another one that comes before this House, and it's a test on who supports workers, who supports our kaimahi, our most vulnerable workers, to not only be paid what they're worth, but to be looked after and recognised under our workforce legislation. Mr Speaker, I'm calling on both the ACT Party, the National Party and New Zealand First tonight to support this bill, and I commend this bill to the House.
Very tame in comparison, and was there any misleading stuff in that statement from Shannon Albert?
I mean, he asked this very simple question, right? How is it that the employees stealing from their employees, employers stealing from their employees is not a crime? It's a very simple logic question, right? So no, there's nothing misleading in his speech. Yeah.
Interesting, because in the court of law, in civil and criminal matters, the judge listens to both sides of the story, isn't it? I mean, you have your say, even if it's frivolous or it's true. The point then would be there also should be culpability for the employers. So in a way, although I'm on the center and on the right, but I have to say that this bill has some credence because it's ethical, because you're fighting for, because all of us, I was an employer, but I was also an employee before. Yeah, so you can empathize with those who, you started from scratch. I was working in, I think in Melbourne as a uni student, 18 years old, wearing I was a blue collar worker. You know, all the Toyota hubcaps, I'm the one who crushed it, all the rejects and grind it. And you know, that was in La Trobe Uni, running out 30 minutes. You got to be in time for the last bus back to uni. So, you know, you start from somewhere, right? So there's a need to empathize with those who are workers, you know, because we are or used to be workers, you know. And I think for employers, sometimes they forget where they started. Even as a real estate agent,
how many of them actually go on the front line to actually sit there and do that? Like, a good example is the physio firm I go to get physio at, KCP. Yuri Hinson, the owner, is also on the front line with his staff, not sitting in some big swanky office and playing golf. He actually tips in more hours into the business per week than most of his employees. But, you know, he's still in touch with the front line. You know, and he has a strong retention rate of staff. Like, it's a very low turnover compared to other practices in the industry. And that's the sort of thing, you know, how many people sit there and do it. Like, when I'm out sitting there selling coffee in there, if remember Wings of Wairarapa, you know, I'm the one on the front line making all those coffees. Not an employee getting paid $25 an hour. I'm the one behind that coffee machine doing the coffees. You know, I leave the $25 an hour employee to fill up the slushing machine and take the cash. Because, you know, I do that, and, you know, it's quite interesting, you know, because even that, you know, I own my own business, I'm still that frontline person, so I still have the empathy of a worker. But many who have, say, you know, progressed from, say, being frontline worker to management to board of directors to on the golf course have kind of lost that same approach to their frontline worker. And I mean, you know, it's like me when it comes to getting like my car fixed. I go to owner operators where the owner is on the floor, not just the worker, the owner.
You know? Not everybody was born like a billionaire's son, like Trump. Trump is a billionaire's son. He's born with a silver spoon, so you can see you can see the, you know, the apprentice sack, you know, because he has been like shaped, you know, sociologically conditioned to not think about, hey, this worker, you know, what is he going through? I also think
that there are a lot of these MPs who are speaking against this bill. I mean, if they're not quite sure whether, I mean, the wage theft is a big problem or not. I mean, they are electorate MPs, most of them, I suspect, and all they could have done is just maybe like put out like a, you know, like a survey to their, like, hey, have you ever experienced any wage thefts? That could have answered their questions if they are not really they are not sure about these things. I mean at the end of the day, what we're asking here is just consistency really in our Crimes Act. When it comes to employers stealing from employees, it's a crime. It's a crime. When employees stealing from employer, it's a crime. If it's the other way around, it's a civil matter. It's very inconsistent. So we just really looking for consistency here. Make it the same. And whether employee or employer stealing from each other, it should be criminal.
Yeah, and
there shouldn't be any exception. There shouldn't be any inconsistency.
Yeah, and thank you, Stacey, for that comment on there. You are totally right. And as Eric does know, when it comes to setting up It's in the Ballot shows, I'm not just the pretty person behind the desk, but I'm also probably on the floor making sure that everything's all working before the show actually runs, and we'll spend probably 2 to 3 hours setting up, saying the order of that sort of thing, and making sure that all the right gear works in the right places. So, and that's an example from It's in the Ballot. If you watch me do with the coffee cart, same sort of thing. I make sure that things work, and there was, and it's making sure the equipment works in that. If I'm going to go to a venue where I'm getting someone else's power, I make sure that they've got the right power points. Anyone who says to me, trust me, it will work, or I'll just plug it into a 10-amp plug, you're setting up a problem for me. So, that's something that's there. And the thing is, I don't tend to get the problems because I do my homework in advance. So let's get to the cherry of the show, the part we've been looking for.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is my experience in this House that there's nothing like an employment relations bill to bring out the fire in both Labor and National and where those divisions lie. So it is for the True Balance and New Zealand First to come through and sort through the mess that we've been listening to. First of all, for this Crimes Theft by an Employer Amendment Bill, this is New Zealand first opportunity to contribute to this bill. It was put into the House during those dark, windswept days when we weren't represented in these halls. And as Duncan Webb, the Honourable Duncan Webb articulated in his speech, whilst we may have changed horses in the ensuing period, we actually haven't changed our core values, and that is very much we are an egalitarian party. New Zealand First, because we haven't had the chance to be in this process up until this point, we're taking the last call here, not for any nefarious reasons, but for the fact that we weren't part of that select committee. The bill did come up quite unexpectedly at the last Members' Day, and we wanted to listen very carefully to what both sides had to say before taking it to our caucus for discussion. It is the view of the New Zealand caucus that this bill is not without some merit. New Zealand First has always taken a balanced approach to employment relations. We absolutely believe that a fair day's work deserves a fair day's pay. We have an absolute history of championing workers' rights, and particularly around increases to the minimum wage, which we've taken into and been successful in coalition negotiations. We actually had Dennis Mager, the chair of, or the chief of the First Union, speak to our convention on the weekend. We're genuinely interested in hearing workers' perspective on employment relations issues under this government. Conversely, we also understand that employers are critical to building this economy. They risk their own capital, often put their family home up to provide employment and a living for others. 97% of the employers, the businesses in this country are, in fact, small businesses, Mr. Speaker, with under 20 workers or more. In fact, so much do we understand this. I could go back to the Honourable David Parker over there, he would remember this. We absolutely arm wrestled Labor to accept retaining 90-day trials for those small businesses under 20 workers in the 52nd Parliament, because we do understand that critical balance between employees and employers. I'd like to commend the member, Camilla Belich, for bringing this bill forward and taking it, picking it up from Ibrahim Omer, the original proponent of this bill. And thank you, Camilla, for your constructive engagement as we have worked through some of the details. There's New Zealand's first view that there are two clear anomalies in the law. It is already a criminal offence for wage theft for immigrant workers on work visas. New Zealand First cannot see why New Zealand citizens or permanent residents should not be afforded the same process of legal redress. Secondly, it is a criminal offence for an employee to steal from an employer, and this to us seems an inequity. So New Zealand First will be supporting this bill through to the committee stage. We do, however, have heard and we've listened carefully to the concerns on this side of the House. So we do want, there are some things that we want to see examined further through that committee stage. This bill must focus on real crime, intentional and malicious acts of theft by employers, not unintentional mistakes or delays due to cash flow issues. Without clear distinction, the risk is that honest employers facing financial hardship may be unfairly penalised. Moving this issue from a civil to a criminal jurisdiction changes the burden of proof for both employees and employers. Criminal cases require more evidence and resources, potentially straining the justice system or making it, conversely, potentially harder for workers to successfully pursue cases. Further, we believe that the shift from the balance of probability to beyond reasonable doubt will increase the difficulty for employees to prove theft by employers. The higher threshold could mean fewer successful prosecutions. This requires further investigation to ensure that the bill truly benefits employees without creating unintended consequences. So New Zealand First is eager to ensure this bill does go to the committee stage, does get tested by all parties in this Parliament. We will remain engaged and working through the finer details. I'm sure the member will help us to alleviate some of those concerns. But at its very core, we believe that business is about paying and being paid. A fair day's work deserves a fair day's pay, and you should be paid. So with that, we'll commend this bill to the House, Mr. Speaker.
So, the icing on the cake.
Credit where credit's due. They're supporting something really good here.
I would say that, we got sorry. I was just going to share the good news here that, of course, we can't generalize across the board and say all employers are, and demonize them. I mean, there's another good example, even in the National Party side. You have Ryan Hamilton, right? The MP for Hamilton East. Interestingly, his name is Ryan Hamilton. And he worked in the hardworking Joe Block's business, there's a cleaner. He worked his way up with his dad, and then he had a cleaning company and had developed it into 4 franchises. He was sharing his testimony. So he's actually a hardworking Kiwi bloke. Frankton, he lived in Frankton, which is kind of on the labor side, interesting. So again, although he is with National, he's a good employer because he pays his workers well, and we can't generalize across the board and that all employers are exploiters. That would not be the case. So
that is true, Dr. Erica. But the question has to be asked that even though there are national MPs that are probably really awesome bosses, why are they against this bill? That's the question that needs to be asked.
And are they being whipped? Well, they actually are probably being whipped to vote against it.
All right, I see what you mean. Okay.
Tends to be what happens in our Parliament is there's a high level of whipping. We're probably one of the highest level of whipped parliaments in the world.
Sorry, what were you saying the last part? Can you repeat that, sir?
We're probably one of the highest whipped parliaments in the world. So when it comes to voting, I think we're probably one of the few that actively use party vote as its standard vote method, rather than walking through the eyes and the nose doors. Like, I can't even remember the last time I've seen a bill actually where people walked through the eyes and the nose doors and you had a bunch of tellers in there, because most of our bills go through party vote. They don't go through individual votes.
I mean, the conscious vote is when it comes to, for example, I mean, the homosexual
religious issues.
The homosexual law reform was the bill was on, was a conscious vote, and what did the choice to die, David Seymour's bill? That was a conscious vote, and there are times where the parties actually allow the conscious vote that the MPs
the banning of gay conversion therapy for second and third reading. National let their MPs vote with their conscience, but in the first reading they were whipped into voting no.
So there are times, most of the times though, the party would actually decide, and it's the whips kind of like sit down in the chamber. They would vote on behalf of all the party. So that means whether you agree or disagree, it doesn't count. So your vote is going to be counted, whether you like it or not. And it's a party line that you have to follow. And you are the member of the caucus. You have got the obligation. If you go against that, then you have a big problem.
It is interesting because MMP Ibrahim was meant to be more representative democracy when it was started in 1996. I remember voting in the referendum for it. And Ibrahim and everybody here, I mean, Laura too, is meant to be more representative. So we should allow the individual members of parliament to have a conscious votes on most bills rather than, and you notice you have that.
I love me some direct democracy.
Yeah. How about the 5% cap? That is anti-democratic. I mean, we said, we extol ourselves as, look, one of the most progressive nations in having MMP after Germany. And then the next moment we have a 5% cap. I mean, even if I think a political party has 1%, they should have 1% of the vote. They should have one MP. Let's say if there's 131 at UDY.
I mean, in Germany, to do coattailing, you need 3 MPs to coattail in Germany. But in New Zealand, that wouldn't actually get to, even trying to get near that threshold, because Germany in the Bundestag, they have 660 MPs, I think, at least. Whereas we have 120, which I actually personally think we actually need more. But, the other one is, if they lowered the threshold to 4%, that would still bring in 5 MPs into Parliament. And if you have 5 or more MPs, you have to have a person in the debating chamber at all times to represent your party in the need of voting. You can't proxy vote. And that's the reason why
if this bill was a conscious vote, more than half of the national MPs would vote for it.
I would say so. I mean, maybe even
I can put my hand in my hat and say more than half of them would have voted for it.
And I would also say, if you put this out to referendum, it would majority pass in there, because people go, hey, what? How is that not a criminal offence? Of course I'm ticking yes.
Yeah. And a lot of employers would tell you actually, what? And I do, as a union person now, I talk to a lot of employers about this, and a lot of them actually, they support this bill because they know that it's not going to affect them, because they know that they do the right thing. They pay their employees on time, and they pay their full amount, so they don't have any problem with it.
So do you think, guys, that we should do away with that 5% cap and really?
Well and truly. I think 4 at the current point, and increase the number of MPs to 150, and then I'd say drop it down to 3%.
Right. I don't get you. Why do you need more MPs to be more MMP?
Because we have had a 25% increase in population, but we've not had an increase in MPs since 1996. And at the rate we're going to end up with a lot more seat overhangs under its current system. So if we shifted to, at the moment, the law states that the population to work out a quota is the South Island population divided by 16, and that works out the population quota. Pre-MMP, that used to be South Island population divided by 25. I think it's 25. And at that point in time, there was no maximum number of MPs that could be in there in the first past the post system. But with MMP, we've got to go up there. And the thing is, as our population has increased, our electorates have increased to compensate, but our electorates themselves, but our total number of MPs haven't, and the list MPs are going down each time there's a representation. Like the next representation review, we're due to go up to 73 electorates in New Zealand. And also the fact is, with more urbanisation, there's a lot more populations that are swelling into big population centres. At the same time, some of these rural electorates are getting very, very big. If you sit there and take a look at the Wairarapa electorate, the fact that it crosses 3 regional council boundaries throughout the process is quite a big electorate. You look at West Coast Tasman, you've got Haast at one end, and you go right up to Farewell Spit at the other. I
once drove in Wairarapa with Kira McNulty all the way to, I think, is
why Puckenham but not why
part of all the way up to part of Hawke's Bay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you look at Taranaki King Country, it stretches from Waitara at one end right up to way past Raglan and cuts right into not quite Tamaranui, but just around Tamaranui and like basically like effectively around the side of Hamilton and halfway up.
As it stands now, people actually miss out on representation, on the meaningful representation of
and a good example that Tim McIndoe brought up with me, when he first was elected in 2008, Hamilton West covered a whole heap of rural underlying area. I think it included Narawahia. When the boundary redraws came in, it narrowed its way down. But people outside the constituency, instead of going to Barbara Courager because their new MP, they kept going to their old local MP because Tim was closer. And he had to sit there, and so Tim had a memorandum of understanding from Barbara Courager that those ones near Hamilton, he was allowed to act on behalf, being shepherded as they worked out an arrangement with that. But he said that was quite noticeable because every time they kept redrawing the boundaries, the epicenter point started from Auckland. And we, like him and I said, maybe the next redraw, the epicenter should start from Hamilton because Hamilton's about hit similar size of population to Wellington, but it's only got 2 MPs, whereas in Wellington we've got 3 electorates. So that's something where there could be a change, as should Hamilton be the starting point of the radius of the new electorates, where you can have a Hamilton North, a Hamilton West, and a Hamilton East, or something like that, and cover some underlying rural area that is kind of part of Hamilton. I mean, also, if you look at the Taupo electorate, it includes Cambridge. And Cambridge is a 20-minute drive from Hamilton. Yeah, I mean...
demographics requires the change, isn't it? The demographics, the population expansion and growth. So from that context alone, it requires more representation, isn't it? So,
and that's why I believe we need to increase the number of MPs, but we need to change the population quota, because when MMP first came in, the average representation was 55,000 people. The average representation now is 65,000 people.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing to sit there and also, go up on that particular one. And the thing is, when you're representing, 15% more of the population, but you've got the same resources, it does take a bit on there. And especially if you get some areas like the fact that you've got 2 list MPs and an elected MP from the Wairarapa at the moment. You get other situations, so that's something which is quite unusual because that's not normal for that to have happened. Wairarapa might get a lot more done because they've got 3 people batting for them. But in the case of MMP, but it doesn't, what happens if Taranaki King Country, Barbara Courager is literally basically, got this very huge area. It will take probably 4 hours to drive from one end of the electorate to the other. And basically, got to represent a lot of people because she's literally basically from just north of Waitara all the way up to well beyond Raglan. Yeah,
interesting, because if you look at what do you call it, the Freedom New Zealand Party, right? They had like 1% or something, and then there's another New Zealand Loyal 1%. So by right, under MMP, they would have 1 seat each, kind of, let's say 100%.
Possibly 2. If it's 1.2%, it could be approximately 2 seats.
So at least they would be more representative, and just for the sake of not wanting to be a democratic purist here, but in terms of MMP, which was meant for representative democracy. So I felt that, and then of course, I mean, they could be on the right, but let's say there could be some parties on the left.
Look at Top. I mean, Top
could have
got at least if the threshold was if there was no threshold, they would have got 3 MPs.
Yes, they would have 3 MPs. So maybe we need to do a bit of.
There's a lot of things that can be fixed in this government. A lot of things are not right. But that's probably like, because the discussion for another day. Otherwise, we can go until tomorrow and we're not going to cover it.
Now, I've been. Stacey has reminded us there is 20 minutes. Well, actually, it's a while ago since she reminded us that there's 20 minutes to go. Do we go on to the Corrections Victims Protection Amendment Bill? Because we're likely only going to be able to get one speech.
Okay, then. What do you think, guys?
Let's start off with Rima, the bill holder.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is actually an honour and a privilege to stand before my colleagues and yourself today for the second reading in a member's bill in my name. And this bill, as we just mentioned, is the Corrections Victim Protection Amendment Bill. It was drawn out of the ballot on the 1st of February 2024, this year, and the first reading was 20th of March this year as well. It was open for submissions, Mr. Speaker, between the 6th of April and the 6th of May, and 12 submissions were made. And I take that as a positive thing, that there weren't that many submissions. And the way I'd like to take it in this instance is that means that a lot of people were very much in support of the intention of this bill. This bill at its core, Mr. Speaker, is about victims. And I don't shy away from the fact that victims and protecting victims plays a huge role in the course and the direction of my actions and my thoughts, especially having the privilege of being a Member of Parliament. This Member's Bill has also opened up my eyes to the oscillations of lawmaking, Mr. Speaker. And I recall, I go back to the first reading, and you know, I was very excited about what we had ahead of us because of how much it would be able to protect victims, especially reflecting on some awful, abhorrent examples of how victims were being contacted by the perpetrators of the crime against them from prison. And I'm still pleased that we are charging ahead with this bill, and I'm hoping that we still will have, or I still will have, the support of the House. But significant changes have been made, Mr. Speaker, and I guess that's where I come back to the oscillations of lawmaking and the eye-opening experience thus far that this has been for me. Because I reflect back to when we started receiving advice from corrections. And the advice, and it's noted in the departmental report, essentially, prima facie was changing the whole, not changing, but seemed like it was changing a massive part or parts of the bill. And to be honest, my human nature was like, what's going on here? I thought we were going down a certain path. Why are these drastic recommendations being made? And we conversed about it, Mr. Speaker. The Justice Select Committee, I'm very blessed to have my colleague, James Meagher, as the chair of the Justice Select Committee. He's compassionate, he's able, and he's extremely acute. And acute. Cute like my little brother, but acute. And what I appreciate was the patience of the Justice Select Committee and correction staff as I navigated through the recommendations that were being made. And so we asked our questions, we got some thorough answers, we went back and we asked again, and recommendations that were made, and we proceeded to accept those recommendations, is that first and foremost, and this is holds quite a weight and magnitude with respect to the intention or where the bill is going, is that we're going to ensure that the provisions only apply to people in prison. Now, as much as I and many people would have loved for these restrictions to apply to people that are under the care of corrections out in the community, the fact of the matter is there's about 26,000 people in the community, and it would be almost impossible for corrections to make sure that they can keep an eye on all of them and all the communications they're making. So we've brought it back. We've brought it to just affecting people that are in prison. Secondly, just excuse me, Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker. Secondly, we've amended, we've deleted what was Clause 5 and Clause 6, but we've essentially expanded what was Clause 4. So the amended Clause 4 of the bill now is going to be amending the powers and functions of the Chief Executive of Corrections in Section 8 of the Principal Bill, the Corrections Act 2004. And after Section 8(1)J, it's going to insert Section JA, ensuring that processes are established and maintained by corrections to inform visitors of prisoners and recipients of prisoner communications of measures they can take if they do not want to be contacted by a prisoner. We also accepted the recommendation that we amend Section 77 regarding outgoing telephone calls to add, after Section 77(5), 5A, in deciding what conditions, if any, to impose, the Chief Executive or the Commissioner of Police must take into account the interests of the victims. And I'm pleased that we've managed to get across the line so far the word must take into account, as opposed to may take into account the interests of the victim. Mr. Chair, we've also amended section 104, and that pertains to general considerations relating to mail. And we're adding in section 104G, after the interests of victims, we're going to insert, including, in particular, being free from unwanted contact from prisoners. And we're amending section 128, and this is pertaining to offences by a prisoner. We're actually adding a new offence. And that new offence, section 121.28.1R, will be, hopefully, that a new offence that a prisoner cannot contact a person or solicit anyone else to contact a person who the prisoner knows or ought reasonably to have known that they don't want to be contacted. This part in particular, we did spend quite some time considering this, what entails this ought to have known. But in the end, I, and so far the committee, feel comfortable with that amendment, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the people that made submissions. Sorry, before I do that, I would like to state that we have removed one of the clauses that was saying that corrections had to include in their annual report a report about these measures. We've removed it because the strong advice from corrections was that it was not very feasible, doable, but I'm comforted by the fact that we can ask questions during annual review to try and extract that information as well. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the people that made submissions, and in particular, I'd like to highlight victims' support. And what I appreciated about the written submission of victims' support is that they spoke about how victims deserve to feel safe. Absolutely, 100%. And this essentially encapsulates a big part of what we're trying to achieve with this bill. They highlighted that victims deserve to be free from re-victimisation. And when we look at what's been happening in the last few years with respect to perpetrators being able to contact the victims of their crime, that's what happens. It becomes a re-victimisation. So this law will help to ensure that victims are free from re-victimisation. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the fact that they said victims deserve to have autonomy. So sometimes victims want to keep some level of contact between their family and the perpetrator. And the way we've amended this bill touches on that. And indeed, assisting victims to move forward, or when they have autonomy and they make that clear choice, I do not want to be contacted by this person in prison, that helps them to move forward as well. Mr. Speaker, I thank everyone that's been involved in this COPAPA so far, and I hope that the whole House can continue to support this very important bill.
I don't hate the bill. I'm just concerned about the cuts made to law enforcement at the moment. But otherwise, good bill.
Yep. Yeah.
Sounds like a good.
Yeah, exactly. Sounds like common sense.
It's also wrong for her to assume that having a less submission is meant that people are happy with it.
Yes.
I'll be honest with you. How many people actually knew it was happening? I can tell you right now.
Exactly.
I knew about it because I watched it, but I can tell you right now, if I sit there and ask people what the Crimes Victims Protection Amendment Bill is, they'll go, "Hey, what?"
Mm. But it's amazing. She said that. I'm very happy that less people submitted, only 12, and that means that people are happy with it. That's a wrong assumption. Otherwise, I think sounds like a bill that actually have the heart of the bill are the victims from what it sounds. So that's a good thing.
And I've actually done a lot of what's it called? They've done a lot of recommendations to adjust the bill as well to make it a better bill. So for a bill that only had 12 submissions, they did a lot of work to it. Yeah.
I mean, sometimes like if you have good submissions from people, a lot of good submissions, it's a good thing. It could be a reason, like to introduce some amendments. But sometimes also the committee could deliberate and the people can come with ideas, members themselves, and that could also lead to a lot of amendments as well. So there is so many ways you can amend it's just all you need is just the committee members working in a good faith together.
Yeah. Just to tweak the bill in a way rather than to do a whole intensive legislation, isn't it? And the cost of it, the time frame where that time could have been used by the other members of parliament on other more important bills for health and other complex.
Yeah, Dave here saying that good laws are no good if they are unenforceable. Chop, chop, go to the police. Yeah, good point. Yeah, if you don't enforce them, good laws that don't mean
30k speed areas in Wellington were historically known as not being enforced. But the best thing I saw on, I think it was Easter Monday last year, at the Tenakori village shops, a police officer on his motorbike sitting behind a vehicle with his radar gun. And it was quite a real shock to see someone, a police officer enforcing the 30k areas. Because like, if you try to put a speed camera van there, it's filled with parked cars. How are you going to park it?
Yeah.
I think it's also good because, I mean, like, okay, a scenario where I think there was a bill where someone, like rape victims, right? And you have to go and face the person again, in terms of that person wanting to talk to you, okay, it can be from, be gender neutral, it can be from women or men. But the point is that I think this helps to at least protect more the victims, where you don't get re-traumatized, I think that's good. That's good. I remembered in the 1997, 98, I actually was one of those who funded rescue missions. You won't believe it, in the hill tribes in northern Thailand, where they were selling their children because of the addiction to drugs, to be for sexual slavery. And together with some members of the Baptist Church, we rescued about 60 of them. And of all the things, our 2020 reporter reported this and exposed our operations to the drug lords because it came up in TVNZ. And we had to shift the base. Well, not me. There were all those working together, church workers. We had to shift it because the drug lords, in the northern side selling drugs, the truck traffickers, they knew then where the church was, where the rescued sex slaves were, and they were children being sold off for as cheap as $500 US. Very painful. And that sort of hits me in my heart, because to see that if someone has exploited someone sexually, that they would have to go through the whole rigmarole of communicating with that person again, that's just it's wrong. Yeah. So yeah, I'm very strongly. So who is the one who proposed this bill, by the way?
Rima, was it?
Yeah, she's a member for Takanini.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. I think that's good.
She's a newbie. She's 22, class of 2023.
Oh, okay. I think that this is quite a good bill then. And it has bipartisan support, kind of? Or?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, what it sounds here, it does feel like, I would be surprised if any parties go against.
Yeah. That's
okay,
good.
let's get to the section of the bills that are closing up for submissions in the foreseeable future. Closing for the Sentencing Reform Bill, Amendment Bill, submissions close on the 29th of October, which is one day after Labor Day. The Armed Shooting Clubs, Shooting Ranges and Other Matters Amendment Bill also closes on Tuesday the 29th, one day after Labor Day. The District Court Judge Amendment Bill okay, I've already beat you to that, Stacey. Another alert's popped up on my phone. Okay, the District Court Judge Amendment Bill to increase the number of judges by one is due also on Labor Day. And the parliamentary bill is due on Wednesday, the 6th of, the 6th of November, where you can get the submissions for going on there. So get your pen and papers out and write it. I think we might sit there and shock the the Parliamentary Select Committee, just so we can sit down there and actually, put in an additional bill, because I said they're probably expecting just a submission from Sir Geoffrey Palmer.
Okay.
So yeah. So have we found everything tonight?
Pretty good.
Pretty good. I think we have covered most of the news.
Good Correro.
Yes, good Correro.
So we like.
Yeah, and Ibrahim, thank you for being the first former MP to be on our show.
Thank you. We appreciate
all the people I've actually
Pleasure.
you hold the title.
No, for all honesty, Sam, thank you for doing this, and I've enjoyed myself. And hopefully the other panelists, Eric and Laura, also enjoyed themselves as well. And also people who've been commenting, all
yes, you can see that keep going through. Yes, it's quite an active chatter to go through, as seen on there. And I mean, as I say, the point of the show is to work out. It is to let people know what's happening in the House. Showing competent members of Parliament versus incompetent. I mean, put it this way: if you watch It's in the Ballot, was it the order paper on It's in the Ballot? Nicole McKee comes across as a very sane, level-headed, well-organised minister. Whereas you've seen a couple of others which are a bit flip-flop and don't really know what they're talking about.
It's because she's speaking constantly on the thing that she has been advocating for before she became an MP. So she came in one thing in mind, to overturn the legislation of around the semi-automatic weapons. So it's that's the other thing. Maybe you should organize a panel around that, Sam. I think that's actually it's a very important issue.
Yeah, no, the different bills in there. And I mean, okay, this week we didn't have any voting on bills, but that's because your bill came up. And to be honest, as executive producer, that was more important to be displayed because it's a bill I personally do feel very passionate about seeing.
Well, we hope, Ibrahim, you
someone is telling you, shut up, Sam.
Remember, Kiwi Skirt, it's Nicole McKee, not Nicola Willis. Nikki no votes from the Haria electorate who didn't even know the fairy tale, half of it's in her electorate.
Radian also suggesting to me that I should go to a big, hairy news.
Oh, to BHN, yes, I wouldn't be surprised. Or you may end up having Paul, the other one, also making contact with you as well. I mean, many of the guests have ended up on, Behind the Wall, have been discovered through the order paper. Yeah.
Cool. Good to know.
Okay, so for all of those watching at home, thank you for watching. You can enjoy the rest of your night. And for our panelists, if you want to stay for after panel chats, you can sit there and stay joined in, and we can net away for the next 15 minutes as well. And we'll see everyone. Oh, now we do have something on here. The House is going into extended sitting on Wednesday at the moment, but it is to help extend the House to private, local, and members' business. And on Thursday afternoon, there'll be a debate, which I don't know, that could be a bit of a first. Going into extended sitting time for Members' Day.
I thought it was because of the Darlene Turner thing.
Oh, no, that has nothing to do with it, but I think she'll be getting dragged out by the Sergeant of Arms. If you get my opinion, I think she'll be in the chamber.
That's not going to take a lot of debate. That's entirely subject for a Speaker of the House. He decides on it, and I don't think it's going to be a hard decision.
It's going to be tough, isn't it? Because Greens were supporting they were kind of for more democratic representation against the anti-voting. And then now
they were never fun. They never supported it. They never liked it, but they find themselves really cornered. And Darlene is in the wrong.
The good thing is they have gone through a very thorough process.
Yep.
And I think it's actually going to work in a positive atmosphere because the bill being more successful is the fact they've gone through this long, slower process.
If the caucus just decided this would have been, I think it could have been a lot of blah blah around it, but they went to the membership. So delegates have voted about 180 unanimous.
Yep.
So yeah.
Okay, let's roll the closing credits and
let's get to closing.
Chat.
Okay.
Migrant exploitation.
Thank you for watching the Order Paper, your express ticket to the New Zealand House of Representatives. every episode, we unravel the complex world of legislation, debate, and democracy. From bills to select committees, we've got it all covered. From our team of political commentators who will dissect and explain what's happened so you can remain up to date on what's happened in the Aotearoa, New Zealand Parliament. To support our channel, you can become a Patreon member at patreon.com/itsinthaballot. The Order Paper podcast is brought to you by